All right, guys, this episode is brought to you by Major Beauty. Your girl is about to hook you up because y'all know how I do my lashes all the time. And Major Beauty is going to offer $20 off your initial full set of lashes. And the first 6 months, you can also use this promo code HERR20 and you can get $20 off your membership because she does offer membership services. So she not only does eyelashes, she also does permanent makeup, those new henna eyebrows. If you're not ready to go full force on the tattooing of the eyebrows, you can try them out by getting this henna stuff done. I haven't tried it because y'all know I got microbladed eyebrows, but I do use Kiana for my lashes. She is my new lash tech. I'm loving her. She's great and she's super duper professional and you're going to love her little studio. So check her out, The Major Beauty. Make sure you use promo code HERR20 to get a discount off your full set and your membership for the next 6 months, guys. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another HERR Lounge podcast. Before we get started with our quote of the day, I just wanted to tell you that this episode will be very special. We don't normally do this. Usually our second episode that drops on Friday is exclusively for our patrons. But because I just felt that today's episode is very important to get out there and for people to know and understand what is really happening in our world today, in our schools, with our children. A lot of times I think that we don't really pay attention because we're busy, or maybe we think that for whatever reason, social media just heightens things and it's exaggerated and it's not happening in your area or in your neighborhood. But a lot of this is happening a lot more than you think. If you've been listening to my podcast for a hot minute, you know that I'm big on this subject. I'm very much against all this sexualizing that is happening in schools. I am very much against speaking on comprehensive sex education. I don't think it's a teacher's job. I don't think it's a school district's job. I think it's a parent's job. Regardless of how busy you are, it's still your job at the end of the day. Monica Leal Cline is someone who I heard on other podcasts, and I felt very lucky that she was willing to come on here and speak on all that she knows, because as a former comprehensive sex educator, she has a lot of insights of what Planned Parenthood is really trying to push on our children. And with that being said, I'll kick it off with this quote, and it says, "Anyone can have a child and call themselves a parent. A real parent is someone who puts that child above their own selfish needs and wants." And I think this is the perfect quote for what we're going to get into. So thank you guys for listening, regardless of where you stand on this issue. I think that this podcast is going to be very informative and you guys will enjoy it. So take a listen and enjoy this also free episode because we rarely do this. So my patrons, don't be mad. It's the only time we've done it. I know. You guys pay for the exclusive, but let's get some of our listeners who don't normally tune in on Fridays to kind of see what else we offer and, let them see that we really have some good exclusive content on our patron episodes. So thank you guys for listening. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another HERR Lounge podcast. I have been telling you guys about Monica for the longest. I first heard about her on The Spillover, and I heard her story and I said, oh my God, I feel like so many more people need to hear about this, especially from coming from someone who kind of felt the same way you did, where I felt like sex ed is very much important to be taught in schools and especially in lower income families. And, that's obviously where you gravitate to, especially for myself, I'm going to say, because I'm Hispanic, I just kind of feel like I got to go help. You got to go help, So Monica, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. if you do us the favor of introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you've done this so many times on every podcast. I could tell you guys her entire story because I've watched her at every podcast. I'm going to say this. It's crazy because I heard you on the Spillover, and then I heard you on Allie's podcast, and I got different information from both podcasts because I started to get worried. And I thought, well, if I'm telling people to go listen to you, they're going to hear the same thing on mine. I was like, are they going to want to hear the same thing? But it was like, oh, totally two different. You literally told your job on the Spillover, but then you went so much more in depth on Allie's about your family and so forth. So please introduce yourself and then just kind of give us a summary of, your background, please.
Sure. Well, my name is Monica Leal Cline, and I'm originally from Brownsville, Texas. So I'm a Valley girl, a Texas Valley girl, a Tejana, born and raised here. We actually live outside of the city limits of Brownsville. So for any of your listeners that are familiar with the Valley, I actually went to Los Fresnos, to the school in Los Fresnos, and it's a tiny little agricultural town. It has like one stoplight. And beautiful, beautiful town to grow up in. And I graduated there and was accepted to the University of Texas at Austin, which was like a big shocker because, my parents, they both dropped out in the 8th grade to help support their families, their parents. And so for me to graduate from high school and then go on to college was a really big deal. Mm-hmm. We were a very traditional Mexican American family. My parents are each other's best friends. They were always together. They were very committed to us, very protective of us. Just a nice upbringing. But I wouldn't say, and I think this will be part of my story today too, is that although I had the example of this traditional Mexican American family, they were very committed. I didn't have a Christian worldview. There were things my parents didn't, they modeled a lot and they did teach me a lot. But when it came to marriage and relationships and sex, we were kind of silent about those things. And I say all that because when I went to UT, I was quickly molded by the world. And like you said as well, Marisol, that you also still want to care for people. And so that's how I really got into sex education, is that I wanted to help who the government was saying were the marginalized people, the people of color, Hispanics, African Americans. This was in the 90s. And so HIV was a big deal. It still is, guys. HIV is still a very dangerous virus that we should not normalize whatsoever. Have compassion for people living with HIV, but it's not a virus that is, that anyone wants to get. But so I wanted to do my part, and that's how I got into sex education. And I decided I wanted to go into the community, high-risk communities that, I was being told nobody wanted to go into, no one wanted to reach out to these people. And I felt equipped to do that. And that's why I got involved in that world.
I have a question for you. Why I heard that, how we come up in a loving family, right? I think unity is always key in Hispanics family, right? Why do you think that in Hispanic families, we have such an issue with speaking about sex or talking about like the day that this happens, or you happen to be in a situation, you're in a relationship? I've told this story before, but my mom was so didn't talk about anything, to the point where when I started my period, she asked me if I wasn't sure if I had used number 2 in my pants. You see what I'm saying? That's like how they want to, I don't know if it's shelter. I don't really know what it is, why we just can't talk about any of these things. Like we don't ever communicate about sex ed. For me, it was taught in 5th grade, right? And it was very simple when I was growing up, so it wasn't all this, which we'll get into, all this more in-depth education. It was, you'll get your period, boys, you'll go through puberty, you're going to grow hair. It was super duper simple. A permission slip was signed and you either accepted or didn't accept going. That was my parents' way of saying, hey, they're going to show you. Thank God, let them show you, because I don't want to have this conversation with you. You think it's just us being so conservative that they feel like this conversation needs to happen when you marry, or why is like the Latin community so like not open with this, to where I feel like that's also what's creating some of the problem with promiscuity. Yes, with younger girls who are Latinas, you know, where they'll get pregnant, and you know, she wasn't trying to get pregnant, but she did. And what do you think from your experience of being out there and, you know, educating and so forth, that causes us to just kind of not know?
Well, I think that, you know, for one, living in Brownsville, I was definitely around Mexican Americans all the time. I mean, that was my community.
Sure.
We're very modest people, very modest, have a lot of respect for one another. I feel very privileged to have grown up that way, to have still seen our culture in that way, that we, you know, I was always taught, no matter if we're poor, your shoes are always clean. Your clothes are always ironed. You know, you take pride in your appearance, not vanity, but respect. It was a sign of respect. If I had a hole in my pants, we sewed it. You know, if we couldn't afford another pair of pants, that's okay. You know, a lot of things that my parents taught me. I mean, it's a work ethic. You know, just all this modesty and respect was so important. And I think that modesty, why our parents didn't talk to us, or our moms talked to us about those things, because my mom didn't talk to me about it either. It was very hush hush, you know. We didn't talk about that. But I think what's happening is that that worked for us when we were all on the same page, when the culture itself was that when parents did watch their children in such a way that you didn't date someone without your parents knowing it. And really, you had to get permission. Yeah. Those were the days, right? And those days are lost. And so in many ways, I feel like the Hispanic community has this beautiful culture of modesty and just this peaceful, beautiful culture, but yet the world is screaming at it. And then the new generation of children are kind of divided between this respectful culture, but yet when they go out into the world, and especially in public schools, they're telling them to do something completely different. And we're not catching up with what's happening. Now, does that mean that we should become like the culture? Absolutely not, because now we're seeing the issues that come with that. Correct. And so when I have taught Hispanics, or especially the Spanish-speaking community, about what I used to do, what they need to be careful about, that they need to talk to their children, they did come up to me actually into the parking lot when I was leaving, you know, like, Monica, we need to talk to you. But they said, we didn't realize we could talk to our children about these things. And so I emphasize to parents, whether it's the Hispanic community or Caucasians, whoever it is, we can speak to our children in a way that is respectful and honoring of their value and of their bodies, about marriage, about courtship, about sex, in ways that are very respectful, without getting into these graphic things that the world wants our children to learn, which is really sexualizing them. We can teach our children about their bodies and sex and intimacy, sexual intimacy, without sexualizing them, without, really, making it pornographic.
That's exactly what it is right now.
And that's what I do with It Takes a Family, because so much of our culture, what I've noticed is, growing up, it's, well, you need to listen to your doctor, well, you need to listen to your teacher, well, you need, there's always these experts that we respected. And I think in these older generations, we could trust them. Today, not so much. And so that's what I mean about the Hispanic culture now, that it's like, okay, we used to have this reverence for the teacher and for the nurse, but now the teacher and the nurse has turned against us and are harming our children. I'm not saying all of them, but we have to be careful. And I think what's another beautiful and very strong asset about the Hispanic community is that we are completely committed to our children. And so, when the State Board of Education here in Texas, for example, said, hey, we've got this huge pregnancy rate, and well, part of it is because the people in Texas are pro-life. And so when I see, especially our Hispanic community, which many people are saying there's so much unplanned pregnancy among the Hispanic community, yes, there's some changes that we need to make, but to say that those girls should be killing their babies through abortion, that is absolutely an injustice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is killing off our people.
Mm-hmm.
You are literally saying, kill your own people, kill
Mm-hmm.
your own family.
Mm-hmm.
And family is everything, and this is why I created It Takes a Family. I think that when I finally realized that these government programs that were pushing sex on our adults and children, and saying that parents were not the expert, family was not the expert, that they were uneducated, ill-equipped. And hey, I've heard that as a Hispanic,
Mm-hmm.
even growing up in
Mm-hmm.
Brownsville, that if you have an accent or whatever, you're not as educated. All false lies
Mm-hmm.
meant to hold us down. And so when I started realizing that that's what Planned Parenthood was doing, and that's what all these other programs were doing, is that they were basically diminishing the family. They were saying that parents were uneducated, families were unequipped. And I honestly think it's my parents, the way my parents brought me up and my own culture, that made me realize absolutely not. It takes a family.
Yeah.
It's the La Familia is what keeps us strong,
Mm-hmm.
whether we have an unplanned pregnancy or not. But the family's going to be there.
Yeah.
The family must be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times when I speak today, I'll admit I'm speaking my mother's words.
Yeah.
When I'm speaking and I get really upset, I'm like, okay, that's my mom. That's Gloria Leal right now, saying what she needs to say, putting her foot down, because those are my children.
Yeah.
And that is important, that the Hispanics, I don't know how, our community is very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone's on the same page, but I think that there's something that we have in our culture that is very strong. We are conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
We really are conservatives. I think one of our faults is that we can be very trusting of authority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we need to start asking more questions of those people of authority to make sure that they actually align with our conservative family values.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't align, then we are not going to support them. We're not going to vote for them. And we're not going to put our children in their care. And that's something that I believe we need to be doing more in the Hispanic community, is asking a lot more. One, we have to evaluate, what are my values? What is important to me?
Mm-hmm.
And then go out there and ask those questions and make sure that we're voting for people who have the best interest in mind for our family, not to diminish the role of parents in the children's lives. Schools today, and the government says so much like, oh, parents can partner with us on this. Parents can partner with us on this. Again, my mother's voice comes into my head. I don't partner. You don't partner with me. I am the one giving you permission to partner with me.
Exactly.
If I give you permission, it's because I have vetted you.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to be, is we need to start taking that back. We need to take back our family, reclaim our parenthood. Our children are at stake when they know, the government knows what they're doing. These programs know what they're doing. They don't want to change us, the adults, because they know we're not going to change. Mm-hmm. But they know it's very easy to take your child and to change the way they think and the values that they have. And if they can do that at this young, impressionable age, it will last their entire lives. So they are trying to replace us, and it's time for us to take our children back.
100% agree with that.
I want to run through a wall right now. Is what I want to do.
Yeah, exactly. 100% agree. Monica, whenever you first started, I know that your story is you were a volunteer, and then you felt you wanted to get more involved, and that's whenever you went into Planned Parenthood and so forth. How did they make the decision of which schools you would go into, where you would go target? Like, how do they determine that? I was always curious on, like, I know you said you went into like lower income, but how was it? Is it like, all right, guys, so today it looks like this area is where we need to go into? How is that determined?
So according to the funding, the government funding, this is the language that's used in the grants. So we receive funding to reach women of color of childbearing age, which means if a little girl is getting her period at 9, she's now a woman of childbearing age. That's, okay. So,
oh my gosh.
But in addition to that, we were to target areas that had a high incidence of HIV, STDs, and unplanned pregnancies. And the numbers showed that it was in these impoverished areas.
And who gets those numbers? How do they get those numbers? Based on what? Like the amount of people that go to Planned Parenthood, or the amount of people that, like, how do they get the survey or information?
Yeah. So when people go to the public clinic, when they go to their city STD clinic to get tested, and especially in these impoverished areas, they're going to be going into their public clinics when they're having an issue, an infection. And so all of that data is then sent, obviously, to the federal government, to the CDC, and they compile that information. And then they start to say, and then, of course, we have all these government nonprofit organizations that are within the communities that are letting them know about different behaviors. So when you go to the clinic, they're going to ask you about your sexual activity. They're going to ask you if you're using drugs or using intravenous drugs, IVs shooting up, things like that. So that's how the government knows what's happening in different pockets of communities. And so our job was, because of HIV and STDs and unplanned pregnancies, was to walk these areas. I also believe, though, that as we were implementing these programs, because they were the ones that told us how to do this. It wasn't to say, we were not sent into these communities to say, let me show you how to avoid HIV or other STDs, or how to avoid unplanned pregnancy, which would mean don't do drugs, don't do these things. Let me help you to not have drugs. If you're not doing drugs, then obviously you're going to be healthier. Obviously you can take care of your family. Obviously you can keep a job. No, the approach is, let me just teach you how to clean your needles and make sure you don't share them. But if you do share them, then let me show you how to clean your needles. And by the way, there's this van over here that comes every Tuesday, and you can in your dirty needles and get some new needles, to help decrease the amount of infection. But as you know, if they're still doing the high-risk behavior, they are going to continue to have, bad health outcomes. It's not healthy for people to be on drugs or be living. And many of these people, I was dropping off condoms at women in government housing who were known prostitutes. So instead of helping them to come out of poverty, to help them get some job skills, they had children. Instead of doing that, I was just dropping off bags of condoms to them and enabling their behavior. That woman's not happy. She's not healthy. She's bringing in dangerous people into her home, which means that those people know they can come back at any time, even when the children are there. So I, in all my years of walking, that was my job, was to walk the streets 40 hours a week and do this outreach in different parts of the community. And I'd have a calendar. I'd say, I'm going to go to Booker T this day. I'm going to go to 12th and Chico on this day. I'm going to go to, there's a lot of, we even went as far as knowing which apartment complexes had the most immigrants. We knew that this particular apartment complex had the most Cubans, and there was a lot of drug use and promiscuity. We knew some of the apartment buildings were so dangerous, we didn't even bother going in there, wow. Or we would stand on the sidewalks on the street and they could come to us to get condoms. And so, all of this, the government knows is happening. And in all those years, I never saw anyone going in there to help them avoid these things. I never saw anyone go in there to encourage them, to bring them to Christ, anything to help them to not continue these behaviors. We basically enabled them with this false hope that cleaning your needles or using a condom was going to help you. But the truth is that we would also say, make sure you get tested every 3 to 6 months. Because why? Because inevitably you're going to get a disease. We know it. Make sure you go to Planned Parenthood. Why? Because we know you're going to get pregnant, and what we're doing is referring to abortion at the time. Or I've changed. They're still doing that. And so once I came to Christ, and that's a longer story, but I started to see things differently. I was still doing the same job. I was still in that same job.
So had you already become a Christian and still was out going to these communities at the time?
Yeah. I was. So by the time I became a Christian, and that's a longer story, I came to Christ because I had an unplanned pregnancy. I almost aborted my son, and through different things that God did, saved my son's life. I had my son. I became a single mom. but I needed a higher income than what I was getting. And so I rose up the ladder. So then I started managing these programs. I wasn't on the street, but I was training people. I had teams of people who were going out and doing it. I was going to the CDC and getting training. Eventually, I became a Title X training manager and was managing all the training for the clinics for the states of Texas and New Mexico. So I was rising, going up the ladder, doing that. And I was justifying it because, hey, I'm not on the street. Hey, I'm not the one talking to them. But I was still doing the same thing. And God did show me that. But I think the first time that I realized that when I was the director of the outreach programs, and I had just come back from the CDC, and I was trained on how to implement our evidence-based interventions. And the interventions require that we do a needs assessment of the community. So gathering data. So, okay, community, are you using condoms? We gather that data, we implement our program. And then at the end, we ask them again, are you using condoms? So there was more questions than that, of course. So, we, of course, in these communities, no one's going to just volunteer to come in and fill out a survey. So we offered grocery gift cards, for people to come in. So $100 gift card to go to a grocery store. And a woman sat in front of me and asked her if she used condoms, and she said no. And of course, the question is if they don't, ask them why, what are their behaviors? And she said, well, if I get paid, if I don't use a condom, and if I have one child, I get food stamps. If I have two children, I get a place to live.
Oh, wow.
And and this was common for the communities that I was in.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first time, as a very young Christian, I had just been saved, that I realized this program from the government, it's just trying to convince her to use condoms. That's all it does. It doesn't teach her to change her life in any other way other than using condoms. Keep doing what you're doing, just use a condom. And here's a broken woman in front of me, and that's the hope I'm giving her. And I just knew she needed Christ.
Yeah.
And so I started to realize this isn't working. If anything, I'm enabling these behaviors that are killing these families in these communities. And then it hit me, Marisol, and they're using people of color to teach people of color.
Because you're going to
trust each other. They trusted me because I was brown.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's the trust between you and the person, because you're going to feel, oh, she's Hispanic, I'm Hispanic. For sure, they wouldn't send someone that's going to do bad or harm or misinform, because we're the same color. That's kind of how it is.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off that, actually, if I could. Did you have a certain perception of these government-assisted programs when you first started your career versus when you obviously kind of got out of it all? Like, what your thoughts were of just government-assisted programs similar to this and what they do to the communities?
When I first started, I thought we were just doing amazing work. Like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. We are out there in the communities that other people are ignoring, and we're helping them. I mean, I really thought we were doing a great thing.
Yeah.
I would say that it wasn't until after I came to Christ that I realized, whoa, this is not what I thought it was. And that's why I don't leave God out of my speeches today. I mean, I can talk about data. The data still shows. I mean, for example, when I have meetings with the state board or with others or in legislation, these programs have been in existence, for example, all over our nation. But when I talk about Austin, the same very zip codes that we targeted to reduce the incidence of STDs and HIV and unplanned pregnancies with all of these government programs, passing out condoms and everything, are the very same zip codes that are still at high risk for those very same things today. And that was back in the 90s. Nothing has changed. Now, if something is changing within that zip code today, it's because the population is changing.
Gentrification?
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
Yeah. But it's very mixed right now. My husband is in construction, and so he does some work down there. So you still have homeless people right on the sidewalk where there's a brand new home, So it's very mixed right now. But these programs have not reduced the incidence of these diseases at all. They really have not.
Why do they think that if you go in and say, because it makes sense, right? If you say, I'm going into this community, there's a lot of women who are having unprotected sex. The thing to do is to go give condoms so that perhaps they're not having unprotected sex, or they don't have diseases, so that they don't get pregnant, right? In theory, I too would think that is what you're supposed to do, right? But also, would you say that going into these elementary schools in this area where there's lower income families, to start teaching these little girls about being respectful to yourself, not sleeping with just any man, why? And I know it sounds so old fashioned, like save yourself, right? Because that's, heaven forbid you say that nowadays, right? Like save yourself for marriage, right? Because that's not cool anymore. But going in there and teaching that, why don't they see that beneficial? Is it because now they're not going to depend on the government? Now they're not going to have these programs, this funding? What does it look like whenever, maybe that should be my question. What does it look like when you go to work and you're going to have a meeting about, you're going to go into this community because X, Y, Z? How does that training happen? Like, do they feed you statistics and say, this is why? And then you're like, oh yeah, totally. That makes sense. Because you're telling me right now, and it makes sense to me, not the needle part, but the condom part makes sense. Because let me tell you, I remember in junior high, we were in the 8th grade. Where I grew up was not the best area, right? In Spring Branch here in Houston. But I remember in the 8th grade, there was a baggie handed out. It was weird though. It was only to the kids that were like in the bad school. They were handed these baggies, and the baggies had like condoms. It explained to you, and I only knew that because my friend's cousin had the baggie. And so the baggie had like condoms. It had like information on like about going to get STD, like you're tested. And it also had, lubrication, yes. So it was these little baggies that were handed out, and I was like, well, that's odd. How come that the rest of the school didn't get it, but the kids over there did get it, right? And so I now as an adult, I think about those things. I was like, oh man, I was like, this has been happening. It's just so heightened now, because now they're encouraging for you to, cut off your boobs if you want to, now they're saying like, here's some hormones if you want them. I mean, your parents don't have a say. We'll get into that because I have that's my biggest problem. And to be honest with you, it's a joke and like an ongoing joke about my podcast, but I swear to you, it seems to be my topic about every other week, because I'm reading about these things almost every day. And it's like, I can't take any more of it. It's like, where is it going to stop, and when is it going to stop? And when are these programs going to start getting exposed and what they really are? And I think, going back to what you said, I don't know if it's life. I don't know if it's social media. I don't know what it is, but it seems like parents are wanting to be more hip now and want to make it cool that my child, heaven forbid I say her, because she's identifying as they right now, and it's like, we all have to be so accepting of these things. I can't get with it. And I don't know if it's my age and maybe I don't get it. I'm not that old, but dang, I'm going to be 41 years old, and I just look at things and I just can't believe that we went from this to this right now, because it's so in the open. I sent you some of the books that I have a problem with. Yeah. We read a page on my podcast because I feel a lot of people still don't believe it's happening. I have personal friends who feel there's nothing wrong with these books because they use cartoon to draw it out. And so
that's what makes it worse.
And they feel that's a good way to kind of show. And I'm like, what are you talking about? How does this? No, like no cartoon or not. Like, no. Like, we can't put a child's mind is so pure. There's absolutely no malice in their brain whatsoever, and for you to just sit here and say, it's okay if you like a boy. It's okay if you want to sleep with the girl. It's okay. Let me show you these tools that you can use. And I hate to say this word, in your booty hole, so that you know what to do. What? I mean, what 8-year-old is thinking about these things? They're thinking about their Transformers. See there, I'm showing my age. They're thinking about their Legos. They're thinking about anything, video games maybe nowadays, right? But that, I just have a problem with it. Where did they feel, or how did they feel that this was a solution by teaching condoms was going to stop or improve this, I guess, over, making more children or stopping sex? Where do they get these conclusions from?
So there's so many things to say with what you just mentioned. So where do they come from? The government wants to believe that they're morally neutral. And so what that means is if you're having sex, I don't care if you're 10 or whatever, use a condom. In other words, they're morally neutral. Whatever you do, we're just going to teach you how to do it safer. If you do it with 50 people, as long as you use a new condom every single time. If you're using sex toys, as long as you clean it or use a condom on the sex toy. They're morally neutral. Now, I don't believe they're actually morally neutral. That's what they say. Mm-hmm. I believe that's immoral. I believe, and I might lose your listeners at this point, I believe there are two worldviews in this entire globe. There's God's worldview and there's man's worldview. Mm-hmm. And the government, with these programs, are using that secular worldview. Anything goes, including children having sex. Mm-hmm. Anything goes. And today, I mean, I was saying this years ago, but no one would believe me. But now today, anything goes, including calling pedophiles minor attracted persons and stop discriminating against them. Have compassion on those pedophiles. Don't call them pedophiles anymore is what they're saying. Anything goes as long as you're kind about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything goes. That is the way of the government right now. Mm. How can we change that? It might take some time. It means that we need to get back to be bold and obedient to the word of God and take those positions in our government. Take those positions in, the Health and Human Services Department or whatever, and start making some changes. And they call it being morally neutral, but they're not being morally neutral. They have a morality. It is a secular morality, and they are forcing that upon our children. Now, they know what they're doing is wrong. You mentioned earlier that children are innocent. They are. When I was trained by Planned Parenthood on how to teach this to children, she told me, Monica, these children, she said two things that contradicted each other. She said, number one, the children are having sex and they're having all kinds of sex. This is why we need to teach them. But number two, they're inhibited to talk about sex. So which one is it? Are they sexually active or are they inhibited? So she was saying two different things. She's like, so they're not going to tell you what they're doing. So you need to tell them everything, and you need to break down. And she literally said, you need to break down their natural inhibitions. In other words, you need to take away their innocence and get them comfortable with talking about graphic sexual activity. And then she showed me an icebreaker that I could do to help the children start breaking down their innocence, basically. Let's say that, not just inhibitions. Break down their innocence in the classroom and introduce them to every sexual activity and how to use a condom in those activities. And then to get tested and then have the inevitable abortion. Unbelievable. Sex education teaches children how to dehumanize themselves, how to objectify themselves and each other. And then when you start teaching a child and they actually start doing that, it changes who they are. They don't value themselves and each other anymore. They don't value sexual intimacy. And why would they value marriage? Because they haven't been taught that. They've just been taught about pleasure. Mm-hmm. And even if they're not having pleasure, they believe this is the expectation. And I'll share a story to prove that in a little bit. And so once a child is dehumanized in that way, and once they learn that their bodies and their and sexual intimacy is all about just pleasure like a machine, then it's a natural next step to abort that baby, because it's not really a baby. It's not really a human. It's just an object that will become inconvenient to me. Now an object that they tell me is going to make me poor. So I have to kill it. But they're not going to tell you it's killing because then then we're humanizing it, right? But the whole goal is to dehumanize them. Why on the larger picture? People who are so broken and fragmented by doing this to themselves and each other are much easier to control. Now they can continue to be that population that's dependent on the state to take care of them and to offer them their solutions. And it's replacing the family.
Number one,
so now the state becomes the family, not la familia.
Yep.
100%. The familia has been completely broken and pushed over to the side. And Planned Parenthood told me that. They said parents are a barrier to service. We don't want them around because when they're around, once they find out their children are coming here, we'll never see that kid again. We don't want families involved. And that's why I created It Takes a Family. Because when I asked God, oh, how did I get into this? Why did I do this? He reminded me about what Planned Parenthood always said. Parents are a barrier to service. Parents are uneducated. Parents are ill-equipped. Parents won't talk to their kids. And so I made it my mission to tell parents the truth and then to help them learn how to talk to their own children. And a big part of it is fathers. When a father can speak, I mean, mothers are obviously, that we need both. But I was a daddy's girl. And if I hear from my father, my value, the value of my body, him wanting to protect me every way, spiritually, physically, seeing how he treats my mother so well, and then reminds me that the man that I should be with should also treat me that way, would make a huge difference. And to see my father protecting me so that when he would notice that a young man who didn't have good intentions and kept him away, that means a lot to me.
Yeah.
Fathers are so important. Mothers as well, to both the sons and the daughters.
For sure.
And so we need to be talking to our children. And it doesn't mean graphically. Now, should children know that there's diseases out there? Absolutely. But it's not to give them permission to go out there and go get it. Diseases are not normal. But this sex education and abortion industry is normalizing disease. They normalize disease. They're normalizing childhood sex. They're normalizing high-risk behaviors. And families, you have absolutely every right. And actually, you are absolutely equipped with superpowers from God to intervene in your child's life, and that you're really the steward over your child, not the state, not other people, but you. But the only way you can be effective is if you're a consistent person in their lives, not just present, but speaking to them, not just being on technology while you're making dinner or whatever, or doing your own thing. We have got to get back to actually back to basics. Speak to your children, have quality time with your children.
100%. Did you have something?
Well, I mean, there's just so much to add to that, right? I don't want to derail the conversation, so if I feel like I'll interject. But I do. Let me just ask this real quick. So, in your own words, Monica, how would you describe who benefits the most from having a household that doesn't have a nuclear family?
Well, the government benefits most from a household that doesn't have the right. Yeah.
And how I guess for people that may not have ever really thought about it in those terms, like how does a government benefit from a household that has a broken family?
When you become dependent on the government for everything, you're now controlled by the government. You're told what you can eat and how much you can eat. When you receive food stamps, when you're given a house, they're going to tell you where that house is. You're not, where government house, you don't get a choice. You have no choice at that point.
How do you kind of break through that cushion where they're like, pero me están dando esto, me están dando lo otro, y no tengo nada para qué preocuparme, and this, that, and the other. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think one of the things that we're going to have is there in every culture, there are going to be people who are passive, and there are going to be those who are driven. I come from a family that was a family of entrepreneurs. We were not wealthy. We were in poverty a lot, but my father always talked about and I believe that even the Hispanic families around me, there was so much pride in being able to buy your own land, to own your own house, to, mi propio negocio, to have your own business.
All three of us, they can relate to that.
Where have we lost that? We've lost that. Now we're like, oh, I have food stamps. Oh, I have, when did that happen?
It's a great question.
When did that happen? And the more that we allow our children to be unsupervised in the world, doing whatever they want, we're going to continue a generation after generation of dependency on the government. And I don't believe that's not good for any culture. I mean, I speak for all cultures here. I'm speaking for humanity, the human race here. But especially, we need to get back that pride that we have within our own community. I tell my husband about this a lot. He's Caucasian, but I'm like, the way I grew up, the people I was around, my family, we had pride. We had a work ethic. We didn't, there were times, there were times that my mother, she worked at a cafeteria at the school. So that means that she was unemployed in the summer.
Oh no, did we lose her?
I think she froze.
Hopefully she comes. I know. I was going to say earlier, like we have a Hill Country internet combined with.
I don't think it's mine.
No. Well, she's in Hill Country.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you meant like,
No.
I think you were calling it like the hill, the off brand. I was like, no, we're inside now.
Hill Country Fair is awesome. What are you talking about?
No,
we may
she
have lost Monica.
froze.
Yeah, I might have to send her another link here in a second and then pause the podcast. Yeah. So let's pause and then we'll bring her back.
Okay.